Good news, the spending freeze memo has been rescinded. We'll talk about whether this means some of the laws of political physics still apply. Trump is trying to get around civil service laws by offering so-called buyouts to federal employees, inspired by a move that Musk, or really, I'd say choreographed by a move that Musk did at X. Hegseth was confirmed, and RFK Jr.'s hearings are today. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
All right. Well, we've got a lot of chaos here. Just before we went to record, Trump rescinded, as you mentioned, this order, which was pausing trillions of dollars in federal grants, loans, and financial assistance programs. That came, this order from the Trump administration came a day after a federal judge blocked the directive, but not without a lot of heartache on the ground for people who are doing everything from, administering healthcare with Medicaid, Medicare, running schools with Title I. We can go down the list. I'm not exactly sure what the administration was trying to do with this. Jason, do you have a theory?
They seem to have this idea that they can come in and fully reset government, because if you look at, there's some moves that I think are along the same playbook. For instance, the U.S. refugee program. I have been very vocal, and I've talked about it on the show, about the horrible effect that suspending the entire program that allows refugees into the country, the effect that has on Afghan refugees, among other refugees. Well, but the way that they did that is very similar. The executive order said, we are suspending for a minimum of 4 months, but it's probably going to be indefinite, the whole U.S. refugee program. And then when they're asked about it, they say, look, we have a right to stop things, look around, see what we want to keep doing, see what we don't want to keep doing. So they seem to have this idea, Ravi, that they can come into government and stop government from doing any government while they assess whether they want to keep things that Biden was doing and get rid of other things. And that's something every president has done, but they have done it during the 3 months between. That's why we have an inauguration on January 20th, is that is the period for you to show up, meet with your counterparts. You were in an administration. I wasn't. You took part in this. You meet with your counterparts and figure out what works and what doesn't, right?
Yep. There's a whole series of meetings. Now, I think and before Trump, there were, processes, it wasn't like there were things were totally harmonious between Bush and Obama or whatever, but behind the scenes, everybody just works stuff out, and the politics are over when you have the transition. I do think that with this, there's this sense out there that the Trump administration, even with rescinding this order, it's very clear that they're going to try to pick winners and losers in programs and decide what to disperse or not, regardless of the backtracking on the sort of broad order that they had. And they've had other executive orders that I don't think they've rescinded, including one that essentially says that they're going to defund any climate initiatives and big parts of the Inflation Reduction Act, right? And so this begs a question, which is, can he do that? And in normal circumstances, one would say he cannot. There is an act of Congress called the Empowerment Control Act, which prohibits this. There are also constitutional concerns, but we've got a Supreme Court that is overwhelmingly Republican aligned, and not just Republican aligned, but at least 4 of these members seem to be a full-blown rubber stamp for Trump no matter what he does. And evidence for that was this little noticed case where it was a 5-4 decision where the 5 was that the sentencing could move forward in New York, but the 4 was that it couldn't. And it was without an explanation, the 4. But the fact that there were 4 justices on the Supreme Court who, when Trump wasn't even president yet, said that he couldn't be sentenced for a state crime, there's just literally no legal justification for that. So it shows you that he's got 4 to start with to support him no matter what he does. And so all he has to do is pick up one more person, whether it's a new person appointed or he just persuades Roberts or Barrett.
It's why you and I have stopped referring to the court as the conservative justices and the liberal justices, and we instead now refer to them as the Republican justices and the other justices, right? Because
Right.
they are not proceeding like jurists. They're proceeding and frankly voting like safe seat Republican House members whose only concern in the world is losing a primary. I mean, there's no other reason why you would give no legal justification for saying we are not going to have a sentencing, and we don't need to tell you why for the president.
Right.
And it comes down to the thing that is really, it turns out, one of America's greatest vulnerabilities in the way it's constructed, which is you and I and generations before us, basically since the Civil War, have grown up with this idea, because it was constantly borne out in reality, that the institutions that have been put in place keep really bad people from being able to do really bad things should they capture the office, right? And so,
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well, they're blaming everybody else. This is their MO. And Jeremy, if we have this Tapper Miller video, let's play this clip because it shows you the kind of posture that this administration has had when people try to call them out on this BS.
We just talked to Congressman Don Bacon, a Republican, a Trump supporter. We just interviewed him. He said that there was a lot of confusion. He said that the executive order
created by the media, Jake. The OMB guidance memo, if you read it, is as clear as day.
It's pretty
my point is,
and confusingly written. Parts of it are about DEI, parts of it are all disbursement. It is.
Yeah, DEI suspended. That is correct.
Right. No, I'm just saying, like, it's kind of all over the map, and there is confusion, and it's not just liberal media.
Jake, tell me.
Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski said.
You're not understanding what I'm saying.
But
I'm saying that
I want you to address this.
I will, but I'm saying that a false story was put out that people responded to. It's unfortunate that people put out a false story. That's all I'm saying, Jake.
Okay.
That's all.
So now they've rescinded this. Yeah, now they've rescinded this order. So obviously it was confusing and it was chaotic.
Well, apparently Stephen Miller was fully defeated by the false media story.
Right.
Apparently they had to rescind a whole executive order because of these guys who are impervious to the media. So, I mean, it's just BS, right? They screwed up. Diana and I have been talking about this because when this was happening, she was like, well, maybe they are still incompetent, because our big fear has been they've always been malicious, but now they're also, more competent because they aren't surprised to have won the election. They've got all these people who have done it once before. This feels like something that in their, excitement to shut down a lot of things that they, in theory don't like, but also in reality work well, which is kind of their move, that they, they did behave in kind of an incompetent way with the way they worded the memo.
Well, it's interesting you use the word malicious, because there is a new strain of accusation coming from the right, which is that, no, it's not that the bureaucrats are refusing to carry out these orders, Jason. It's that they're carrying them out with too much enthusiasm. This is the malicious compliance accusation. Now, this may be confusing, listeners. What am I talking about here? Well, an example here is Senator Katie Britt, Republican of Alabama, who's upset because the president's executive order apparently prompted the Air Force to cut trainings that referred to the Tuskegee Airmen. And she got upset, saying, why would you do this? Now, meanwhile, the order is very broad, and it says to terminate all discriminatory programs, including illegal DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility mandates, policies, programs, preferences, or activities in the federal government, and whatever name they may appear. And you have bureaucrats, Trump bureaucrats, threatening people, saying, essentially, if you don't rat out your compatriots, then you're going to be the person who gets fired. Britt is saying, no, it's not Trump's fault. It's not our fault. It's everybody else's fault. It's the people who are, clutching their pearls over this. And it's the deep state who's now taking this very broad and, as Tapper described, confusing order and implementing it quite reasonably. No, they're maliciously complying, Jason. That's what they're doing. This is a new level of chutzpah.
Britt's from Alabama, right?
Correct. She's the one with the creepy response to the State of the Union.
Yeah. Well, so it just goes to show you, the only the only inclusion program that was shut down that a Republican says that shouldn't have been shut down is the Republican from the state where the Tuskegee Airmen's history came from, and where the whole state, white or black, is very proud of that history. So this is not even her this is her trying to navigate being basically a racist in national politics while also navigating home state politics at the same time. So it's a complicated thing. But yes, the idea of malicious compliance, that bureaucrats, I don't even like using that term, that civil service folks, that government employees who are trying to do the job that they've been ordered to do are somehow malicious in doing that, reminds me of two stories. One that's just sort of a sort of a tale that's often told in the military without specifics. And it's just that a general becomes the commanding general on a new base. He's being driven around. It's like his first day as the commanding general. And as he's driving around, he looks at a building and he says, "Oh, looks like we need a new roof on that building." Doesn't think anything of it. A week later, he's driving to work, and he's being driven to work, and they drive by that building. He says, "Oh, wow, hey, look, somebody put a new roof on that building." And his driver says, "Well, yes, sir, you ordered us to." Like that's how it actually works when you're in charge. But the whole like, why did you do what we told you to do thing? You have to be specific in government and in the military with these things, because people want, if they don't understand the commander's intent, they want to do their best to carry it out. And it reminds me of, I think I've told this story before, but one time when I was in Afghanistan, I had, among many other duties, there were a few vehicles that belonged to the intelligence division, and they were unarmored, like low profile vehicles. They're basically they were like the Mitsubishi version of a Ford Escape. And the idea was we could drive them around without looking particularly military. We would usually not wear a uniform when we were in them. And one of them needed maintenance. It needed like regular maintenance. And there was an Air Force Master Sergeant who, was an Air Force guy, was not really used to being on the ground in a place like Afghanistan. And he was one of the newer guys, and he was, in charge of that vehicle. And so, and I was in charge of all of them. So I said, "Hey, Sergeant, this vehicle needs to go in for maintenance." Now, what I meant was we need to do a convoy to take this vehicle in for maintenance because it's Afghanistan. That's how you do things safely. I came to him later, like the next day, and was like, "Hey, have you planned a convoy yet?" And he's like, "Oh, no, sir. I just hopped in there and drove over to Camp Phoenix and got it looked at and brought it back." And I about lost my mind because this dude wore a uniform in a low profile vehicle to drive across Kabul. And I was super fortunate that this guy did not get kidnapped, which he was at a very high risk of doing. And so, but that's the point, is there are things for which specificity is required if you want them to be done in a certain way, but they don't want specificity on this. They just want everything shut down.
Yeah, and there's a sister to this story, which is the buyout question, and this is still happening. This is playing out. This has not been rescinded, at least as of this recording. The White House offered federal workers buyouts on Tuesday night for those who didn't want to end their remote arrangements. It seems like it might even be broader than this in terms of like who can take a buyout or not. And the way they sent this out, I think, was notable. The Office of Personnel Management posted an email with the headline "Fork in the Road," which is the subject of the same an email that Elon Musk sent in November 2022 when he bought Twitter, now X. When he told, in that email, Musk told employees to commit to long hours of high intensity or leave the company. So that could be a coincidence. I think not. And if you're starting to piece this together and be like, what's going on here? Well, this chaotic energy we're having, where things don't seem like they're well thought out, the presence of people like Elon Musk could help explain that. And this one I do take seriously because I actually was just on LinkedIn this morning, and I saw a bunch of people I know who are not political appointees who I don't know if they're technically taking the buyout or not, but who are leaving right now. And some of them seem to allude to taking a buyout. So I'm like, this could have some major effect. They're pushing people out. In some cases, they're firing people. Like I know people who have been involved in various investigations of Trump, like Aaron Zelensky at the DOJ, who, whether he was fired or just pushed to resign, it's going to be one of those two. The inspector generals have been fired. Anybody involved in any Trump investigation has been fired. Obviously, anybody who's going to be involved in anything approaching DEI or anything that's even vaguely related to DEI, he's going to lose their job. So this I do think is meaningful, and they're trying to basically Twitterify the federal government, basically starve the beast and strip it down to the bone or more, and maybe build it back up with people that they that are ideological fellow travelers. That's real.
That's I think the I don't know if it's like tied for the scariest part of this, right? Because on the one hand, you have two competing philosophies that are both wrong, that they are trying to implement at the same time. The first is this long held, not just a Trump thing, but long held Republican idea that people who work in the public sector must work in the public sector because they weren't good enough to work in the private sector. Right now, they don't say this about political appointees or elected officials, but for people who work in like GS positions, people who are government workers who are like on a pay scale, the assumption among most Republican elected officials is that they do that job because they couldn't make the cut in the corporate world. And it's just what they believe. Like, I remember, I've told this story before too, I think, that when I was on the budget committee in the state house like 100 years ago, and every year there was this amendment they would try to pass to make it where nobody in the state government was allowed to make more than $80,000 in salary from the state. And their reasoning for that was the lieutenant governor of Missouri, their salary was $80,000 a year. And why would anybody who works under that person get paid more than the second most powerful person in the government? Okay, a couple problems with that. One, some of those people are like PhD scientists, who are trying to keep arsenic out of the water, and they generally,
or God forbid, football coaches, Jason.
That was the thing that usually stopped it, was the football coaches issue. That's exactly right. But then the other problem, the reason that we were usually able to defeat it is because the state constitution says that the lieutenant governor is a part-time job. And it's true. Every lieutenant governor has another job. Their job, there's like 5 people who work for the lieutenant governor, and their job is just to hang out in case the governor died. So my point here is that came from a ideology that said, if these people were any good at their job, or if it mattered who was in these jobs, then they would be in the corporate world. So it must not matter who's in these jobs. And they believe that in a lot of ways. They believe that from a competence standpoint, it doesn't matter who's in these jobs. That is and it's wild to me because that is characterized as a businessman or business person's approach to government. When anybody who's had any success in business understands that if you don't deliver good customer service, you're not doing a good job. And you're not going to deliver good customer service if you just put anybody in these jobs. And then the second part of this is what you said, which is that ultimately they want to get around all of the bargaining agreements that have put in place, all of the rules that have put in place for firing civil servants. And this is more of a Trump thing than a general Republican thing. And stock the government with loyalists who will do whatever they want them to do and not be faithful to the law, but be faithful only to Trump. And this is the roundabout way of doing that. And that is very scary.
Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of these confirmation hearings, and then we're going to zoom out and ask, like, what are the cultural trends of MAGA right now? And in a more provocative way, is there a MAGA wokeness that we need to be concerned about here when we come back? Did the holiday season mess with your routine? Are you looking to take charge of your life with full mental clarity this new year? Enhance your sober January and embrace CBD Awareness Month with VIA to experience the powerful benefits of hemp without the high. Trusted by over 500,000 happy customers, VIA is the Swiss Army knife of wellness. It's dedicated to harnessing the natural benefits of hemp to create high-quality wellness products. And VIA's collection of THC-free products combines minor cannabinoids like CBD, CBG, and CBN with botanical supplements for targeted effects you can actually feel. Whether you're looking to improve your sleep, focus, or relief, VIA has something for you. VIA is also well-renowned for their award-winning THC and THC-free gummies and vapes, THCA flower, soothing tropicals, or topicals and calming drops, all crafted with the highest quality hemp sourced from trusted, independently owned American farms. And the best part is Via legally ships to nearly all states in the U.S. in discreet packaging directly to your door with a worry-free guarantee, no medical card required. So if you're 21 plus, check out our links to Via's website, link in our description, and use the code MAJORITY for 15% off. And if you're new to Via, you get a free gift of your choice. I love Via. There was a sporting event this weekend that I shall not name or talk about ever again, but I took some Via while watching that instead of drinking, which is what I used to do. And I would have to say it helped calm my nerves because my nerves were indeed tested. And you have those moments that test your nerves. Via could be the tool you use to make it a more pleasant experience. So if you're 21 plus, check out the link to Via in our description and use the code MAJORITY to receive 15% off. And if you're new to Via, you get a free gift of your choice after you purchase. They ask you where you heard about them, and please support our show and tell them we sent you. This year, enhance your everyday with Via. When your car breaks down, you take it to a mechanic with no hesitation. You need it, and it's not something most guys can fix themselves. And men should think the exact same way about ED. But the reality is that you might be hesitant to seek help. Thankfully, through HIMS, you can get access to personalized ED treatment without stepping outside your door. HIMS is changing men's healthcare, providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. And HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewables, hard mints, and Viagra and Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits, and just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. And if prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free, and no insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. And with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMS can help you find the ED option that works for you. Now start your free online visit today at hims.com/majority. That's HIMS.com/majority for your personalized ED treatment options. HIMS.com/majority. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Hey, as we are talking, don't laugh. As we are talking, you think I'm kidding? People will talk about this later on in the podcast.
People should know that during the ads, we have whole separate conversations that are not about the ads, so I'm not laughing about the ads. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's nothing to laugh about in the ads. I don't know why anybody would. As we speak, there is a hearing going on for RFK Jr. to become our Secretary of Health and Human Services. Now, we are in a world where this is not even ranking among the few most controversial picks. That's how scary things have gotten. I would say Kash Patel for me is number one, probably Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, and then maybe I would say RFK.
There's been so much chaos that I didn't even realize that Kristi Noem became the Homeland Security Secretary until
she was in New York City.
Until I saw this absurd photo of her looking like she's rolling into a building in a 4-man special forces stack with her all her battle rattle on, with a bulletproof vest that says ICE on it, which was absurd. But I was like, oh wow, I didn't even know she was. I didn't know
she wasn't. I hadn't seen her that excited since she was taking her dog to the vet to be put down. Is that her? Yeah, that's her.
Yeah, right? Well, except she didn't do it that way. But
she shot it.
Yeah,
right.
This reminds me of one of the funnier things that anybody ever said on the show, which is when we had Sudeikis on, and he was talking about the first Trump administration, and he said that he's upset that that he feels like he has to keep track of the characters in this administration with an even greater degree than he kept track of the characters in the Bartlett administration on West Wing. He's like, I remember him saying, I hate that I have to know who these people are even more than I knew who the cabinet was in the Bartlett administration. And it's true. Like, you feel like you have to know who they all are, which is sad. There's that picture.
Yep. Well, one thing we promised the audience is that we wouldn't cover like every up and down or crazy turn of the Trump administration. I want to keep to that promise, but I do think it's worth mentioning at a broad level what's happening today with RFK Jr., which is, at least from what I saw in his opening statement and the heart of the confirmation hearings going on as we speak, he was trying to distance himself from vaccine skepticism. And that is just a really hard sell based on the guy's record. He has repeatedly questioned the safety and efficacy of vaccines and did it with gusto. He has tried to connect vaccines to autism. He was asked in a July 2023 podcast interview about vaccine safety, and he says there's no vaccine that is, safe and effective. People can watch that clip for the full context. There's this whole question of Samoa, which I've covered elsewhere, but Ron Wyden used his opening remarks to basically talk about how RFK Jr. went down to Samoa to sow distrust of the measles vaccine, and there was a measles outbreak there. And Jason, I'm old fashioned, but I do think like when you're running HHS, like that kind of track record seems super relevant. Like we could debate, like when we talk about Pete Hegseth, whether Hegseth's alcoholism or treatment of women is relevant. I tend to think character matters, and like your, substance abuse matters when you're in such a job. But nobody should question whether your opinion on vaccines is relevant to running the HHS.
Well, how about just your record for being honest, given the fact that his entire campaign, I mean, look, I know that there were things his campaign was about other than this, but I also know that his campaign was launched, post-COVID, during COVID politics, because of his, to be kind, skepticism of vaccines. So to then go before Congress and say, I'm not anti-vaccine, makes no sense whatsoever, right? I mean, it's like the Rock being like, I'm not into action movies. It's like, okay, but that's your whole deal. That's why we know who you are. Or so anyway, I think it doesn't say much about his character, just to lie about it.
Yeah, well, I thought that another interesting sort of turn here was Hegseth, who was confirmed with a tie-breaking vote from J.D. Vance. And McConnell, interestingly, this is where we are in 2025, is McConnell is one of the more centrist Republicans now. And it was him, Murkowski, and Collins who voted against Hegseth. And McConnell really leaned into it, saying effective management of the nearly $3 million military and civilian personnel.
3 million military personnel.
Million, not dollars. Sorry, yeah. Austin Powers moment. An annual budget of nearly $1 trillion and alliances and partnerships around the world is a daily test with staggering consequences for the security of the American people and our global interests. Mr. Hegseth has failed as yet to demonstrate that he will pass this test, but he assumes office. The consequences of failure are as high as they have ever been. Roger Wicker from my former state of Mississippi basically gave a, hey, sure would be a shame if the big boss in the White House were to see you voting against this. That I think was meant to try to push certain people like Tom Tillis back in line. This is relevant for two reasons. One is we have a person who seems to have very recent, if not current, struggles with alcoholism and very questionable, to say the least, treatment of women. Never mind his opinions about the military and lack of experience in any way to do the job he has, is now in charge of our entire military. And then the second, which we could talk about more, is what this would mean for some of the even more controversial picks like Kash Patel.
Well, the thing with Hegseth is, the one thing you got to remember is this is a guy who had to leave the army because of charges of extremism that were damaging to the military. And now he's in charge of the entire defense of the nation. However, I was talking to somebody the other day and they were saying, well, why would Trump want somebody like that? Why, not that Trump's not an extremist, but why would they want somebody who's clearly so incompetent as defense secretary? And what I said was, if you look at the positions where Trump has put these like lapdog people like that's what Hegseth is. He has no real government experience, and he's just a Fox News personality, right? So you put him there. you put he wanted to put Gates as Attorney General, right? Why do you do that? Because there's two jobs in the government besides president that Donald Trump really wants to do, and it's Secretary of Defense and it's Attorney General. And so you put people there who will do whatever you tell them to do, but more than that, who will basically just let you run their department. And that's what Hegseth is doing, which to me is the most dangerous part of it, because I'm already pretty upset that Trump's president. I don't want him to be the Secretary of Defense as well.
Yeah. What do you think happens with Kash Patel now? Because that's the one, to me, that's the big one. Kash
That's
Patel,
the other job Trump wants to do.
Kash Patel to me is the most dangerous of all of these picks. I would say with a close second of Tulsi Gabbard. The combination of those two would be devastating to the security of this country and to civil liberties in this country. You could assume the same three are going to vote against Kash Patel. I know this is asking the impossible, but do you think there's a Tom Tillis or somebody who crosses the line on this one?
I think there might be, and I think the fact that I don't know that there is, but I think the fact that that memo was rescinded is, on spending, again, makes me feel optimistic that some of the laws of political gravity still apply to these folks and to Trump, even though he's basically starting out as a lame duck president who wants to be a strong man and therefore is not really subject to public opinion in his own mind. But he is enough that it can affect his ability to get the stuff done that he wants to get done or retaliate against the people he wants to retaliate against. So I don't think he's going to lean off in any way of Patel, but I think that some of these rules still apply. And Patel's so bad that I think it's possible, or at least we should try.
Yeah. I mean, this all brings me to, especially the first segment that we did around the sort of chaos around government funding. I predicted at the beginning of this year, which is only a couple of weeks ago, I guess, that this could be a year where we hit a recession. And I think this has just never been a higher risk. And I think the reason why people need to really consider this possibility, and, obviously if I knew for sure, I'd be a rich man if I could predict these things, but there's just a lot of, I think people treat the economy in a very simple way. And I think the people around Trump think of it that way, which is, are the big companies free to do whatever they want, right? Is kind of the question they ask themselves. And can we get out of people, can we get out of people's way? And I think this example of the government funding and the heads of some of these agencies underscores the real risks of this administration for the material life of people in this country, beyond like immigrants getting deported and people on Medicaid, like all the people in isolation who are vulnerable, but the sort of widespread systemic risk, which is, we're talking about trillions of dollars in spending, right? That people were confused about whether it was going to be dispersed or not. We're talking about millions of federal employees. We're talking about, even after rescinding the order, huge swaths of categories of things where there are industries around them. So you've got things like university grants, you've got things like clean energy spending, you've got things like infrastructure, right? Those things are all in peril. You combine that stuff with the way he's been talking about tariffs and using the threat of tariffs. We saw that this week. With the immigration enforcement around this country, which not only are we going to be deporting people who in some cases are doing really important jobs in this country, but we're not going to let any new people in either, which means things are going to get more expensive. You put all this stuff together with all the unforeseen other crazy things he's going to do, just think like you put that together with an already overheated economy where PE ratios were as high as they've been in a long time and housing is as expensive as it's ever been. And I'm like, I would batten down the hatches. I think this is going to be a gnarly year or two here, if not more.
Politicians, particularly Republican politicians, believe that the way politics affects the economy is through regulation. And they think that that means that when you cut back on regulation, then you grow the economy automatically and you get this great economic effect. But when you talk to people who are in business day to day, they usually are less concerned with removing regulation and more concerned with the consistency of regulation. with the amount of money that they have to spend on figuring out what the rules are, the whether or not they can plan. It is less about the volume of regulation. It's more about the volatility of regulation. So when you come in and you are just slashing things the way they're trying to do and completely changing what the market looks like in a bunch of different industries, from anything that touches climate to, like you said, anything with universities or agriculture, on the immigration side, when you're making those huge sweeping changes, and when you're doing it in a way where we really don't know whether they're going to stand up in court. We don't know whether they're going to be stuck to after, say, midterm elections. We don't even know before. Look, they've been in office for not very long, and they've already made a major policy that they rescinded within like 48 hours. So when that's the case, that is a really bad environment for business. When you don't know what the rules are going to be, or when the rules change so drastically so often, it is very difficult to invest in the economy and to build factories or to hire people. And I think you're right. I think that they are vastly underestimating the negative effect that level of volatility can have.
Yeah, you throw corruption in there too, right?
Right.
When I was in India, I said, when I'd have conversations with people, I'd be like, India is trending towards early stage Putin Russia, and we're early stage India at this point in terms of the modern era of India. So we're right behind them, heading in the same direction, which is an oligarchy, selective regulation and prosecution, endemic corruption. And I don't think people understand truly what corruption means beyond the ethics of it, right? It just means, like you're saying, that trying to do business is really hard. Like India is a great example. Like if I were trying to start an aluminum, import business or something, and there's like somebody else who does that, even if they're doing it terribly, chances are that person has all the right connections. And it doesn't matter what the regulations are. Trying to enter that market would be crazy, right? Just the way that the country works. And that's where we're heading right now, is like picking winners and losers, taking advantage of ambiguity, and muscling the, you don't like the word bureaucrats or bureaucracy, but the government, the machinery of government to do your bidding. This is all really bad for many reasons, including just self-interest. It's just going to make people poorer.
Volatile and unclear rules and regulations are not the kind, they don't breed investment. So when I was, just before I became Secretary of State, I went on a trade mission to China with the governor, and we were there for 10 days. And I learned this term that probably a lot of people listening to this, have known this term a long time, but it was new to me. This was like 13 years ago. And the term was gray markets. So China had all these tariffs and all these rules about, whether you could trade with them. And so we were going there on a trade mission for the state of Missouri. And so when you met with the folks in Beijing, they would be like, well, we really can't trade with you, in this crop or that sort of thing at this rate. They'd say, but you should go out to the provinces because those are gray markets. So not black markets, all right? Black markets are like illegal trading. Gray markets was this like invented term. And so then we did deals directly with the provinces, but it was super difficult to navigate. And we took with us a bunch of people who, made things in Missouri. We literally sold rice to China during this trip. But the reason that it was so difficult, and the reason that they needed, members of their own state government to go with them to do this, is because it was far too risky for them to directly invest in anything in China, because they didn't know whether their investment was just going to go up in smoke at any time, given gray markets versus black markets versus legit markets. And that's it's just an example of what you're talking about that level of endemic corruption creates a volatility that people don't want to invest in.
Well, let's shift gears. Ross Barkin, a friend of mine, wrote a piece in New York Magazine. And this is kind of just where we kind of step back and just look at larger trends and ideas about what's happening in this country. And he had this provocative thesis, and I'll read you a part of this. He says, where Trump has gotten aggressive is around dismantling the many diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives that Democrats like Joe Biden have long supported. Trump will eliminate DEI from the Pentagon and has empowered his acolytes in the federal government to ferret out anything that has the scent of social justice. working from the rubric established by Christopher Rufo, a prominent conservative activist who has warred against critical race theory and other diversity policies nationwide. Trump is rapidly rolling back the identity-based trainings and curricula that have been proliferating in the government for the past 4 years. Corporate America is already on board, with companies increasingly abandoning their DEI commitments and channeling their inner Zuckerberg, who recently peacocked for Joe Rogan and promised a more masculine energy for Meta, whatever that may mean. The state of play was best summed up by the anonymous banker in the Financial Times, who says, and this is their quote, not me saying this, he says, "We could say retard and pussy without the fear of getting canceled." And then Barkin says, "A new dawn indeed." He says there are two realities can simultaneously be true. The social justice or woke left was needlessly insular and language obsessed, alienating large swaths of the public with its commitment. Yada, yada, yada. We've talked about all that before. But then he basically goes and says, and these people are also, they have a thirst for their own version of social justice, and they have their sensitivities, and they're quick to take offense, and they have their protected groups. And he uses the example of Jewish people, Jason, which is an interesting example where and I think Ross is also Jewish, where he's like, there's this like sense where they're now creating a protected identity for Jews. And Ross was like, maybe that's the right move, right? But it is fascinating that they now have their pet groups that they care about: rural whites, Jews. At various points until Vivek screwed it up for us, Indians were probably part of that too. Asian Americans, they think of this way, right, with the affirmative action cases. And they're quick to take offense. They're quick to use the very EOCs and machinery of government to protect certain people. They're using the social media companies to crack down on dissent and to police language. And what Ross is saying is this is MAGA wokeism. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting frame.
Yeah, it's really smart. It reminds me of back during the Tea Party movement. I can't remember who I was reading, but they said that the problem with the people who were getting elected through the Tea Party was that that the Republican Party used to be the party that said, great, it works in theory, does it work in reality? And that was like why they were even as an opposition, a solid contribution to American politics. He said the problem was with the Tea Party movement, that's when this writer, I don't remember who it was, said that's when it became, well, fine, it works in reality, but how does it work in theory? And, Russ Barkin's point there is that, you could make a legitimate criticism of the left and say that, the left has been too focused on, like you said, on language. And, that has caused people to feel like, hey, look, can we have some common sense here? His point is, I think, a very good one, which is the reaction to that is mirroring it. Is that if you are saying like, it's one thing to say, you can't require people to give their pronouns. It is another thing to say you will be fired if you give your pronouns.
Right.
And that's the MAGA wokeism that they're talking about. That is them claiming that the left is intolerant and they are tolerant, but what they are really being is just intolerant in a reciprocal way.
Yeah, and the good example is transgenders in the military, right? It's like, it's one thing if they're like, hey, everybody needs to meet the same standards, right? Whatever that means. I don't know enough about like what even that gripe was there. It's a whole other thing to say this whole entire group of people can't serve.
Right.
I'm like, well, and Hegseth has said this about women, right? Which I think somehow it wasn't a bigger controversy when he's basically saying that women couldn't serve in combat roles. And this gets to like, with the Hegseth, it's like, what people need to really zero in on that, right? Because it's like, people would be like, well, it's some beta thing where we now have like lowered the bar for women or whatever. But look at Israel, for example, right? Women and men serve in uniform in all kinds of roles, including combat roles. And there's credible evidence that October 7th was actually, it was a female-led combat unit that warned about October 7th and was ignored by men, right? Mm-hmm. That is the kind of thing that can happen in the military, right? It's also, as you know, it's not like we're overflowing with, willing participants in this whole military thing these days. Like they're aggressively trying to recruit. It seems I haven't looked at it this year, but it seems like every year they're behind on recruiting targets. So I'm not exactly sure why we're closing more doors to people. And by the way, immigrants were part of that recruitment effort, by the way.
Yep. Yeah. So, some of the very best officers that I served with in the Army were women, including one who was actually like a trainee of mine during officer candidate school who went on to be the first woman to command an infantry company. And if I were, she's just recently retired, if I were going to war right now and I were like a battalion commander and you gave me a choice of the entire military and said you can have three, you get three companies, you can have three company commanders, she would be my first choice. Like, so it is a very short-sighted view. It makes us weaker to apply this sort of ideology to the military. And also, by the way, most of the people who, like the vast majority of the politicians, Hegseth is the exception to this, the vast majority of the politicians who oppose women having expanded roles in the military never served in the military. And their entire concept of the military has come from like 90s action movies. And right. they think everything is like, Arnold Schwarzenegger's squad from Predator. They don't understand.
Well, have you, by the way, this is totally unrelated to anything we just talked about, but except you just made me think about this. This is a good transition to one for us. Have you ever seen, I think it's called Warrior. Have we talked about this? It's an MMA movie.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Oh my God. I just watched it the other day and I was like,
good.
This should be a more famous movie. I don't know why it's not. And I'm not a big MMA guy. Yeah. That movie was crazy. Mm-hmm. Like, and the premise of it all, which is two brothers who are on different sides of the bracket in an MMA competition. That was a tearjerker. I was shocked at how good that movie is and why nobody talks about it. I have no idea.
It's incredible. It's also like a throwback to when that's how MMA worked. Is it was tournament style and it wasn't like boxing. Now that was probably,
which I guess is crazy if you think about it, because like you're having to do multiple fights in a row.
Yeah, makes very little sense, but was pretty fun to watch.
And that's my one for us. Obviously, nothing else happened.
I see what you're doing here. I see we've transitioned into one for us, and you're like, let's just get through sports without talking about this football game that you pretend didn't happen. And I would usually be totally cool with that, except you went on social media and like made all these predictions. Like I
did not. First of all, that was not a prediction. I started that video by saying I have no idea what's going to happen. It could be one bounce here, one bounce the other, and then I made a
but you came after the Mahomes family. I mean,
yes, I did.
It was. I
take none of that back.
I think you went in on this absurd idea that
I take none of that back.
It's all rigged and all this business.
All non-Kansas City people in our audience will agree with that video, which I'm no longer acknowledging any of this.
No, they won't. Let me tell you a story, because here's the media narrative around the Chiefs now has become that only Kansas City folks want the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl, and that nobody else wanted the Chiefs in the Super Bowl again. Like that's this narrative, right?
Swifties and Kansas City Chiefs fans.
But it's not true, because
maybe a few MAGA people. I give you that.
Please.
Even they are annoyed by the Swiftie part of this. But look, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
You stop. I'm going to talk. So,
I don't actually know what we're talking. What is it? Can you fill me in?
You didn't watch well, I will happily fill you in. But okay, because this, for folks listening, Ravi's deal is, and I get it. It's a mental health coping thing as a Bills fan, which I don't fault him for, is that when they lose, he just pretends it didn't happen. But I just want you, I was on a plane yesterday, and it was not a plane from Kansas City. I was one of the only people on the plane from Kansas City. And I was not wearing, which is atypical of me, I was not wearing anything that betrayed the fact that I was from Kansas City. And I'm sitting next to a guy who's like head to toe in Cowboys stuff, Dallas Cowboys stuff. And so I say to him at one point, I say, hey, my condolences about the Cowboys this season. He says, oh, thanks, like last 30 years. And I'm like, sure, yeah. And then he just goes, so what are you, like a Kansas City fan? And I was like, well, yeah, actually. I said, I was like, I'm from Kansas City. He's like, oh, wow, okay. And I said, is there something that you could tell us from Kansas City? He's like, no. I dress this way, and a lot of people talk football with me, and everybody is a Kansas City fan now. Like he's like, no matter what, whether he was, and so he was like pleased that I was from there. My point is, this dude is everywhere he goes, he's annoyed at how everybody is a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs. Everybody. So
well, he must be right. Yeah, I was sitting next to somebody the other day who was trying to tell me that vaccines, the COVID vaccine that she took years ago, gave her the flu that week. So she must be right too. But actually, it sounds like a really good sport. it sounds like a really good sport, and honestly, I got to check it out sometime.
Please.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that what did I text you? The game ended, and
I have a new mantra.
Sorry, Robbie.
I have a new mantra. There's certain professional endeavors that you and I have where it's going to be hard to do this, but
yes.
I focus on what I can control. And it's like the Bronx Tale, Mickey Mantle doesn't know who you are or care who you are thing. It's like, I can't control what happens in these games. So it's irrational to get upset about them. And I actually had this moment where I was playing tennis on Tuesday, and this coach I'm working with here, I'm getting closer and closer to beating her. And I got to the point where when you're playing tennis against somebody like a coach, there's like the beginning where they just let you hit points. That's like the most of my time with coaches. Then there's a point where you actually get competitive in points with them, and they just actually play competitively with you. And then there's my favorite part, which has only happened to me twice, where you actually threaten to beat them and then they start cheating against you. And that is what happened to me twice. It happened the other day when it was like we're playing up to 11, and she shaved a point off of my score, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I thought it was amusing. But then certain events this weekend happened, and I was in a different mental frame on Tuesday, and I was like, and this is me making no statement about what happened in that game. So just to be clear,
Okay.
but I was this time same thing happened, and I was like, and then she won that match, and I was like, okay, I am not going to lose ever again. And so we played one more. And mind you, I've never beaten her before. I maybe played her 15 times, but I was like, okay, now this is different. And I beat her 11-5. I was like a fucking maniac. And I was like, this is what I take from all of this, which is whatever I can control, I'm going to control that. And listeners, if you're out there, and regardless of what fan base you belong to, if you're somebody who's out there and you're on Goodreads and you want to just do me a solid because you feel bad, even if you're a fan of some other teams, shoot me a note. I'm looking to get some Goodreads reviews for this novel, which I'll talk more about. I'm deliberately not sharing too much about the novel now, but if you want to get involved and do me a solid, shoot me a note. You can either DM me on Instagram, or you can go to ravimgupta.com and just fill out the contact form there. It's easy, and I can get you an advanced copy. We could do a review or something like that, or you could just find me and put 5 stars on there. But I'll say more about the novel as we get close to it, because we got a couple more weeks before I'll get into that. So,
despite Robbie's obtuseness about the Chiefs-Bills game that did in fact happen this weekend, the novel is very good, and people should do that.
Thank you. I was thinking to myself about the game.
That's the sort of the grace that comes with winning all the time. It's just
the way I feel about you only in the immediate aftermath of these games is how you feel about your call time managers, which is I just have an irrational negative feeling that is not your responsibility, that I just have to get through, and it passes, in a couple of weeks. But I'm like,
I get it, man. But I quit running for office and don't have to do call time anymore. So maybe the Bills should try soccer.
Maybe they should. You're right. I don't know.
Maybe
it's
so.
A good point. Yeah.
I don't know. All right. Well, this was fun. Thanks, everybody. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. Oh, you can also find myself and Ravi on social media. He's at Ravi M. Gupta, and I'm at Jason Kander. Thanks, everybody. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.